I'm Molly Cash. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the ISA. We are so excited tonight to have this panel from Nickelodeon. Consider all your options, kids, family, and animated content. Thank you, Kate. Thank you for organizing this panel and bringing these fantastic panelists tonight. Thanks, Halima, Nora, and Travis, all for being here. We have been friends with Nickelodeon and partners with them for several years. We absolutely love them. We love the panels that they do for us. They've always been fantastic and inspiring, a lot of great information. And these panelists have all gone through their writing program, which is a fantastic program. If you don't know about it, please do check it out. It opens in June. It's only open for 1 month. It's free to submit. If you get selected, you get put in a writer's room and you are on staff and you're making money and it's just a crazy experience, amazing. Like, why would you ever say no to that? So even if you don't think you're in the family space or the animation space, it's really a great opportunity, a wonderful way to break in. Enjoy the evening, have a lot of fun.
We love the whole ISA team. They're such great partners to us at Nickelodeon and the Nick Writing Program. And thank you to all of you tuning in to watch this panel discussion we have in store for you. Consider all your options is what we're calling it. I'm really excited to bring you this crew from the Nick Writing Program family so we can talk about their journeys as TV writers and their thoughts on coming up through kids, family, and animated content, which is kind of an unexplored world for a lot of people, I think. It's the impression I get as I talk to people trying to come into the program is like, I never really considered it, but it's an option and I learned about it, so here I am. And I think it's an important conversation to have for up and coming writers. And it's important for them to take part in it because so many people have a limited view of what it means to be a TV writer and how to get there. There are more ways in and more paths to your end goals than you might have considered. No people have the same story or the same ride to get to those goals. And if you don't believe me, I have 3 examples for you of people whose early writing credits include Nickelodeon shows. Courtney Lilly, the showrunner and executive producer of Blackish and Mixedish. Lena Waithe, the creator of The Chi and writer on Master of None. And Jessica Gao, showrunner of Marvel's She-Hulk. And that's not to mention these 3 fabulous, that's where they are on my screen. I'm probably totally wrong for everybody else, but these 3 amazing writers that I have sitting on the panel with me tonight, they all came through the Nick Writing Program. They are Nora Sullivan, Halima Lucas, and Travis Braun. I am Kate Blatchford. I oversee the Nick Writing Program as a member of the Creative Talent Development and Outreach team at Nick. I've been with the team for about 4 years now in various capacities, so you've probably seen me doing things at one of these shindigs in the past, and I'm really excited to moderate. Nora, you want to start?
Surely. So I'm Nora. I was born and raised in the Philly suburbs, Delaware County specifically, which is having a moment because Kate Winslet said our accent is really hard to do on Mayor of Easttown. It's like a special time to be from Delco. And I always loved telling stories. As a kid, I did a lot of plays. I was a dancer, made up songs. And then in college, that translated to me writing musical comedies, which was kind of the same thing, except it was like on an actual stage instead of just for my parents. But my favorite kind of storytelling had always been TV. And so I went to grad school at USC to specifically study TV writing. While I was there, I interned on Mad Men and Nashville, so hour-long dramas. And then when I graduated, I was chosen to be part of the Nickelodeon writing program. And so I spent a year doing that, and 6 months of my time in the program was me sitting in on the writer's room for the Thundermans, which is a live action multicam sitcom about a superhero family. And everyone I met there was like incredibly supportive, great mentors, the writers and the executives, and taught me so much and were willing to just like teach me so much. And so I've gotten to keep working with them as my career has continued. I was a writer's assistant and script coordinator on the final season of the Thundermans. And then my bosses staffed me on Night Squad. And so I got to spend 2 years writing about princesses and knights and magic. And then earlier showrunners of the Thundermans staffed me on Julie and the Phantoms on Netflix, which is a musical dramedy about a girl in a band with ghosts. And that really sort of like brought together the fact that I had been telling everyone about musicals and how I wrote musicals and how every episode should be a musical episode for like the 5 years they had known me before then. So, you know, I've just gotten to keep up these relationships that all started in the Nick writing program as my career has gone on.
Julie and the Phantoms, one of my favorite shows of the year. I binged it in like 2 days. So everybody go watch it.
Get out, guys.
Halima, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Halima Lucas. I hail from Stockton, California, which is in Northern California. It's the more farmlandy variety of the Golden State. And I come from a pretty big family. I'm second oldest of 9 brothers and sisters, with the youngest who just turned 6. So being around kids, being around kids has been a part of my life for so long. I spent most of my life being basically an unpaid babysitter. So that's influenced a lot of the stories that I want to tell. And I feel like I always had this urge to share stories about my family, my parents, my grandparents, my unique parental-esque relationship with my siblings. But it wasn't until someone gave me the login to Netflix in college that I even got into film and TV. I was on track to like get a PhD in sociology, and then I got this login, binged everything, and was like, yeah, I think I want to make movies. So then so after that, I started making videos, and I applied to graduate school, and I also got into USC's graduate program. I went to, but I was in the film and TV production program. So I was more on the directing, writer, director track. And so there I learned a ton of stuff. I wrote and directed a bunch of shorts, one that even went on to win awards and get licensed on HBO, a whole bunch of great stuff. And like most folks who go to film school and graduate from film school, I'm thinking, oh snap, this is gonna be my big break. I'm about to be the next Ryan Coogler. And then I could not find a job in the industry for my life. So I ended up sweeping glitter at Joann Fabrics because it's the only job I could find coming out of grad school. And but while I was there, I feel like I was really, really inspired by my coworkers. Joann's, a craft store is a really interesting place to work, period, but especially one that's so close to Beverly Hills. We got a lot of interesting folks that go there. And I just thought this is totally a show. And I started kind of really, you know, wanting to build a show about that. And while I was there, I crossed paths with someone named Samir Gardezi, who's a writer, producer. But I met him through a program called Break the Room. And in that program, they took a bunch of up and coming writers of color, and we developed and created a web series called East of La Brea. And that went on to get like produced by Powder Keg and stuff. But Samir had went through the Nickelodeon writing program too, and he was like, you should totally apply. And so I did, and got accepted into the Nick writing program, which was an amazing experience. I feel like it's just such a comprehensive program for anyone who wants to write comedy. It's just, no matter what audience you're writing it for, you learn the craft so well. And so, yeah, while I was in the program, learned a ton. And on the way out, I ended up getting a freelance, like I think within the last week of the program, I got a freelance on Rugrats. I got staffed over at Disney TVA on a Disney Marvel show. And I sold a live action multicam to the live action side. So yeah, it definitely, coming out of that program, opened up a ton of doors, and I could not be happier.
Travis, tell us about yourself, please.
Oh my gosh, well, Halima and Nora, I feel like you guys for the panelists who don't know, if you go through the Nickelodeon writing program, you have to come up with like I don't know what the time limit is, Kate, is 2 minutes, 3 minute spiel about yourself? 2 minutes, supposed to be a 2 minute spiel about yourself. And I've totally forgotten mine by this point. So you guys, kudos for you, because I'm gonna have to go way off book for this. You're very well polished on your elevator pitch. But yeah, so trying to recall some of the cliff notes from it. Basically, grew up in the middle of Texas to a racing family, an auto racing family. My dad's IndyCar engineer. My brother's a NASCAR driver. I was, I was sort of the black sheep in the family of saying like, hey, that racing stuff is cool, but man, I'd really love to be a writer. And my parents were like, oh, okay, well, you're gonna, specifically a novelist. And my parents were like, well, you're gonna starve. So maybe consider going to journalism school, and at least that way you can get a paycheck. And so I did. Went to a tiny journalism school in the middle of Indiana. And when I got out, I interned at USA Today. And I remember walking into the USA Today offices, and I was a 20-year-old kid, and almost every day I would see some, lifelong journalist walking the other way with his box of stuff going like, don't get into this business, save yourself, get the hell out of here. Like, I lost everything. I lost my pension. And, it was 2008 when all the newspapers were going online and folding and transitioning. And so, it was partly bad timing. And, called my parents and were like, hey, so that journalism thing you were talking about a stable, nice career, not exactly the future that I think we all thought it was going to be. So anyway, I was, just looking for other avenues and how to make a living as a writer. And I interned at ABC World News in New York. When I was there, I met a couple aspiring TV writers who encouraged me to write a spec of my favorite show at the time, which was The Office. And I did, and it was god awful, and it was terrible, terrible script. But I had so much freaking fun writing it. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This is so much, so much fun. I had never taken a screenwriting class. I'd never taken, my school didn't offer any theater program. I had no idea what I was doing. So I did what anyone would do and just packed up and moved to LA and bumped around on web series and driving passenger vans and set PAing and, just for 2 or 3 years, scraping whatever job I could get and sort of learning the business, from the bottom, and wound up as a writer's assistant on Criminal Minds, and spent 2 years there, sort of figuring out all the stuff I was doing wrong and what I should be doing. And then while I was there, wrote a spec of New Girl, which got me into the Nickelodeon writing program. And that was the first, it was kind of a weird transition. It was going from Criminal Minds to, SpongeBob. And, I never set out to be in kids TV, but really found a home, at Nickelodeon through the program. Felt that it really fit my voice and, my sort of brand of writing, which was comedy with heart. Got out of the program and sold a show to Disney called T.O.T.S, which we're starting our 3rd season on. Animated show for Disney Junior. And during that time, we got another show off the ground called Layne, a live action series for Disney Channel that we shot up in Vancouver. And yeah, just sort of been with Disney ever since. I'm on an overall deal there and starting another series, an animated series we're starting up this summer. We're going to start The Room. So it's been a bit of a journey from USA Today to the kids TV aspect, but it's been great. And I hope today, I know a lot of you guys are sort of either you're considering kids TV or you maybe haven't, but you're thinking about it. And I just want to say it's so great to be able to at least talk to you all and sort of give you, hopefully we can be an open book about, what the kids and family space is like, because it's hard to find good talent. And, when we're staffing up these shows, there's a dearth of great writers because there's so many shows being made and we need new, fresh voices. So it would be awesome, to hopefully inspire a few of you guys to consider it. But at the same time, I hope we can be honest about what the world is like and give you guys a clear picture of, what Kids and Family is, because the worst thing, and I've had it happen a few times, is to have someone come into a room and not want to do kids or family, or not want to be there, or feel like it's not the right fit. And that's not helpful for anyone. So anyway, I probably spoke too long, Kate. That was over 2 minutes.
No, that was great. That was a heck of a pitch. Appreciate that. So you guys sort of delved into what I was going to open asking you guys about, which is whether you came up wanting to write kids TV or if it just kind of happened. But really we're talking about how to break in and making sure that you're exploring all of your options, because this is such a competitive business. So if I could get you guys to dive in just like a little bit deeper on why you decided to apply to the program, and if when you came in, you were like, yeah, I could write this kid stuff, that'll be great. Or if you were like, this is a paycheck, and as soon as I get the right opportunity, I'm going back to Criminal Minds, or what was on your minds?
I think I did have a little bit of a like snooty attitude towards kids TV at some point, because like my thesis in grad school was like about a 12-year-old girl, and I was like, but I'm not a kids TV writer. It's like, but it was about a 12-year-old. And so I sort of already was in every sense, but just realizing that I was. And I think when writers are starting out, there's often this idea of like, know your voice, know what stories you tell, know what kind of stories you want to tell. And that's super important. But I also think it's important to be open to listening to what other people tell you you're good at too. And so the first way I sort of helped myself in that regard was we wrote specs in grad school. So I had like a sample, I had a Modern Family spec, and I got it into a good place there. And then I worked on it more with my writers group, with friends who I really trusted, and submitted it to a bunch of fellowships, a bunch of the writing fellowships that the networks have. Because I think it's good to sort of be like, okay, let's see where people think this fits. Let's see where people think I fit. And so when I got into the Nickelodeon one, it was like, okay, maybe everyone's been right about what kind of stuff I write. And then using that as an opportunity to bring my perspective and like, what kind of writer do you think you are, into the kids' world, which I think has worked out for me.
Yeah, I feel like when I was in grad school, for some reason, I got the nickname Kid Director, and I was like, what are you talking about? And then I cut my director reel, which really should have been called Little Black Children, because that's all that was in the reel. My background, I came in writing for all kinds of audiences. So like East of La Brea was adult. I've written YA, other web series that, just at different ages. And even my thesis film and stuff with kids, it was more in the vein of like a Stranger Things or a Crooklyn. So the tone is different than I think what we traditionally think of the kids TV space. So in that regard, it was a little bit different, but I feel like when I came into the NIC program and came into the space, I feel like even though it wasn't something I expected, I was able to find my voice in that medium and not sacrifice my voice in that medium, because I think that is, depending on what your voice is, that is, possible. So yeah, and what made me apply specifically to the NIC program was because I saw someone like Samir who was writing the kinds of stuff that I wanted to write, but knew that he had gone in through this program. So that was kind of like, oh, okay, I can do this and that. I can write for all of these different kinds of audiences that I have a hunger to speak to. So yeah, that's what made me apply, and I think that it was an additional discovery. And speaking of Night Squad, when I was in the program, each show has its own kind of brand of comedy, and we had to write as a room an exercise to write a spec for Night Squad, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if my voice kind of matches this. And then just like that, I was like, oh wait, I can totally write for this. My voice totally fits in this, and I can tap into that brand of comedy through my own lens too. So I think you might, I think there is some discovery to be had in leaning into the kid space. You might find that your voice has a place in a way that you didn't, you may have not previously thought or currently think.
I'll just piggyback on that. I love what you just said, Halima, that it's about, your discovery and discovering sort of this sort of vastness of the kids side. And that was definitely my experience. I'll be totally honest. I was an assistant at Criminal Minds and looking for any way to be a paid writer. And I would have taken, a job writing on Blackish, which didn't exist back then, but whatever, a New Girl, whatever the big shows was at the time, or a crime procedural, or just anything to I said my goal was to be a professional writer, and I think that's a lot of our goals. And so you just sort of look for like, okay, what's the quickest way I can sort of start to break in and get credits and get experience. And and then the Nickelodeon program came along, and I was like, great, that makes so much sense. Like, here's an opportunity to get paid for a year to write and be exposed to this whole side of things. But honestly, I didn't know anything about the kid space. I loved cartoons. I watched, I had a sense of humor of a 10-year-old boy, and grew up, watching Nickelodeon. But that was all I sort of knew. And when I got into the program, I think had a similar experience where it sort of opened my eyes that it's not just, SpongeBob. It's not just cartoon, sort of comedic cartoons. It's really a whole format with all these genres within it. There's action shows, there's, T.O.T.S is a buddy comedy, there's superhero shows, there's, musicals that like Nora's on, there's so many different aspects of what we consider, adult TV. There's all those different genres. You can find that in kids. And that was a surprising thing to me, that you can exercise those muscles. So, you love writing, gritty dramas. Well, you can do a mystery, you can find those aspects in a Gravity Falls. Or if you love musicals, you can find a High School Musical, the series, and exercise that muscle. So I think that was the biggest sort of discovery going through the program, was just how many different ways that you can be creative. And I think that's sort of a stigma with kids TV, is that it's one thing. You're writing for little kids, and it's like, no, a lot of the times you're writing characters that are kids, but it's not for kids specifically. It's genres that we all love and we all, appreciate.
That's great. You are leading me exactly where I want to go. And I think discovery is such a great word for it that Halima used right off the bat there. I want to know more about what you guys discovered and what surprised you. Travis, that was an excellent example. But if we could just dive in a little deeper, what didn't you know that you learned? Are there any sort of commonly held beliefs or myths that you can dispel about writing for kids content or animated content?
Nora, Halima, do you guys?
I mean, I can jump in. I don't mind. Because there's a number of things I discovered or learned. One, for animation, you don't have to know how to draw or know anything about the artistic process in order to get into animation writing, which I didn't. I think that I kind of counted myself out very early on, even though I love animation and feature and all of that. I was like, well, I can't draw. But when you get staffed on a show, I should caveat that with, there are some shows that are board based, so it varies a little bit, but there are tons of shows where it's writer led. So But you do get to learn about that process along the way. So if there's anyone out there who's like, well, I don't know how to draw and I don't know anything about that part of the process, there's definitely space that you can totally do it. And that's why that format is so collaborative in that way. I think discovering that I've heard stories about some writers' rooms going into the wee hours of the night and that you're kind of locked there, until you break the story. My experience has been that the kid space isn't quite like that in my experience. The day, you're not there all night. People are very mindful about your life and outside of the work. So at least for me, at the very latest 5 p.m. and I'm out. So if that's something that's like important to you, that was cool to know a distinction for kids space and animation space. I think some people think that the jokes and the stories for kids are dumbed down in some way when you write for that audience. But I discovered and wholeheartedly believe that I don't write anything that I don't chuckle at. Like if it doesn't make me giggle or chuckle or tear up, I'm not going to put it on the page. And so, I again think that there's space to be able to tell the kind of humor and the kinds of stories that you want to tell. What else I was going to say? There was one more thing. And I think that something that surprised me is the mentality of writing for kids. Some people might think that you have to kind of go back in time in order to write for kids. And that's kind of true because it's fun to tap into that part of yourself to tell that truth. But I also feel like you are writing for an audience of today, of right now. And in a lot of ways, when you come up with stories, you come up with themes and things, you have to think about what's happening now and what's coming. What conversations are they having right now? And I think that that's really exciting. I think it's exciting to be in a position where you're shaping the next generation. You're having forward conversations and making investments into the future. And I think people don't often think about it that way. But when you do, it makes the work that's already very rewarding incredibly rewarding. So as someone who likes to have, socially conscious content and things like that, I love that the kids space takes that into account and really pays attention to what kids are talking about, what they're thinking about, what their fears are at that time.
I think that's an excellent point. And to build off of that, a mistake that I've seen a lot of writers make as they come up trying to write kids TV is really doing the time machine in your brain thing. And instead of casting yourself back to things that you felt as a kid, things that you were afraid of as a kid, things that excited you as a kid, they're like, what did I do when I was a kid? What did my friends and I literally interact with? And what did we talk about when we were kids? And it doesn't translate the way that you think it's going to. You have to figure out how to find what the truth is for kids these days rather than necessarily what the literal truth of what was going on in your life as a kid was.
Yeah, I think we have, like Kaleem was saying, like we have the opportunity to teach them the norms before they've decided what the norms are, or sort of like set examples. And not, there is that thing, like that's something that I think is a responsibility and an opportunity. And so, you don't want to be like preachy. You don't want to be like, here is a lesson, children. But, to use a like grown-up example, if you're doing like the Schitt's Creek method of being like, oh, we're just not going to have homophobia in this town. Like that's just, there's a way to do that. And so, if you present a world for kids, and not that this is what happens every time, but if you're presenting sort of like, this is how the world works in your storytelling, it can have an influence on, how they go out and live in the world. And I think that's kind of exciting.
I'll second that. I think it's super cool, and then a big part that I didn't really think about, is just the impact that you can have. And I'm sure both of you guys have experienced this too, where you're talking to a friend and they're like, "Oh my God, my daughter loves your show," or "My son loves," whatever it is, and you don't think of, there's a, there's 4 or 5-year-olds that are doing, ukulele covers of the T.O.T.S theme song, and they're not doing that for Criminal Minds. I mean, maybe they are, but that's, probably someone out there doing a weird Criminal Minds cover. But like, that part is so fulfilling, and something that I think a lot of, I think we can get jaded easily out here, and a lot of people can go dismiss the kid side, and it's like, oh, it's for kids, whatever. It's like, kids are cool, and they are our future, and it's everything you guys have been saying. Like, it's so cool to feel that you're having an influence on that, and you're a part of, of this conversation that's going on, that maybe is not the, super bougie dinner party that you're at with your friends, and maybe they haven't seen your show, but their kids have, and that's freaking cool, I think.
That's great. That's so lovely. Ukulele covers. I like almost shed a tear when you said that. You guys just kind of touched on this as well, about being able to sort of stretch your muscles creatively and tell the stories that you want to tell in kids TV. So can you maybe think of an example of, a story that you might not think would translate to kids TV that you were able to translate into something that you were working on? Or maybe less specifically than that, how you take your own life experiences currently and allow that to feed into what you're writing for kids TV, rather than, again, casting yourself back in the time machine?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to think. There's a lot of stories, especially especially working at Disney, and really, I'm sure anywhere these days. My experience is just with Disney, but they are trying to tell stories that are meaningful and impactful, and not not necessarily. I think a lot of people think like, oh, especially if you're writing for a preschool show, like, oh, it's educational, like you're teaching your ABCs and stuff. And it's like, I would be the worst person. I could not write an educational show. I just don't, that's not where my brain goes. I grew up on Ren and Stimpy and, Our Real Monsters and stuff. Like it goes to more comedic. And so, that being said, there is a big socioeconomic, emotional aspect of the shows that we do, at least on the preschool side. And, we're telling stories that are about, disabilities, and about adoption, and, stories that are about inclusivity and diversity, and finding ways to do that within the confines of a show that's about a penguin and a flamingo delivering baby animals, and I think that's part of the fun challenge, is like telling stories that thematically are cousins to what's being told in adult TV, but doing it with kids at the center of those stories, or kid characters.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, I'll touch on that and then give an example for myself. Yeah, I think there's this word like, oh no, in kid space, it's all about a lesson and teaching a lesson. And my thing is, every story pretty much has a lesson, like every single story, Game of Thrones to, whatever, from Cinemax to Nick, there's a lesson on every episode, But really, to not think about it that way, what we do is that we are telling a story that reveals a truth about an experience or a circumstance, right? So, it's not about, like Travis said, it's like you are telling and peeking into an experience it's not about hitting someone overhead with a lesson. You're just telling the truth of an experience, and you gain something about yourself and your character does along the way. So that's both, kids and adults. For myself, I for the project that I was developing with Nick, you know, it really gave me an opportunity to show a lot of the specific things of my family. I live in a multi-generational home. So, and my dad is a truck driver, trainer, and, you know, he works with a lot of folks who are trying to turn over a new leaf, folks who probably were previously incarcerated or something. And so, and the age gap between my siblings is a big part of my life. So the story that I ended up shaping was about this 16-year-old girl whose mother starts a new career as a truck driver. And now she kind of holds down the fort of her two younger sisters, and her great aunt lives there, right? And so, and just kind of the comedy that comes from being, you know, a kid now in a parental situation and someone starting over a new life and having folks from different generations all in one house. Like there's so much fun and specificity in that experience that I could speak to, right? And it's on Nickelodeon, but you know, it's a story told with kids and through kids, but it's to the stuff that means something to me and the experience that means something to me. So yeah, that was a great opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and I think like kids get it. You're telling stories that are related to growing up and having big feelings. And that's, I think, the part that translates from like when I was a kid to now, is remembering that like, okay, like I paid attention to the world and I had big feelings. And kids today are paying attention to the world. How could they not in our current world? And they're in tuned and they can explore more than we give them credit for sometimes. So, you know, on Julie and the Phantoms, we were telling a story about grief in a lot of ways. So like, one thing that helps is that you're using the metaphors of like magic and ghosts and making it fun and kid accessible. And I think music also helps with that because, you know, sometimes musicals are basically just like, you must sing now because your feelings are too strong. And so even though it wasn't like a traditional musical, like the kids are writing their, even though it's not a traditional musical, kids are writing their songs and like not just bursting into song. The ability to incorporate them singing about their feelings also allowed us to sort of like get to a place where kids can take on something even if they can't like put it into words. They can take on the emotion and you can sort of like play with that and make it a catchy song. So that's, I think, what we've been doing on that show.
That's great.
One last thing, Kate, there's also stories that you can't tell in adult television that you can tell in kids. For instance, we just did an episode where a Pomeranian gets stuck in a bubble. You're not going to see that on Game of Thrones.
No, and you
should have seen
kind of, right? Maybe a different finale.
It would have been, I don't know, like maybe if it was a dragon, like a cute little dragon stuck in a bubble, that could have been nice.
Maybe if we just put Khaleesi in a bubble at the end, it all would have been okay.
Solved a lot of problems.
Would have solved a lot of problems. That's what I'm talking about. I do also think we should note that there's a difference between a lesson in a story and curriculum. And nobody coming into kids TV is expected to provide the curriculum. So you can come in with an idea, and if you think you're pitching a 6 to 11 show and your development exec says, you know what, I think this is more pre-K or more bridge, and so you need to have a built-in curriculum, there are experts for that. You don't need to be an elementary school teacher to write a pre-K show. They have people who will do that for you as part of the development process. And so you can bring the story and they will bring the curriculum, and you'll meet in the middle and make magic. Well, let's shift gears a little bit then. I want to talk a little bit more logistically about what it means to work in this space. So can you guys talk a little bit about what career mobility looks like in animation versus live action, or kids versus adult, as you have experienced it?
Yeah, Halima, jump in.
I feel like you probably, I mean, have a bit more of a different kind of perspective because you've had shows in both spaces. What I was gonna point to as far as comparing live action to animation, and please anyone correct me if I have this wrong, but I think animation has a lot of freelance opportunities. So to be able to jump onto a show and write an episode for it, it's a great way to get a credit, and you can also start building relationships with shows or the network in that way. But I don't believe live action necessarily has that. I think they usually just pull from their room. So that's one thing as far as opportunities between the two. And I think the steps as far as the how the room goes and how you can move up in a room look a little bit differently from live action compared to animation. Um, because I think in animation, um, you can be you can be a staff writer, and then kind of the next roll up is kind of a head writer, story editor role, and then from there you're either like the showrunner or executive producer. Um, Whereas in live action, I think that there are some other different kinds of steps in between where you could be kind of like a beginning staff writer, and then I forget the term, but like middle and upper and so on and so forth. So the steps I think for ascending to a leadership role on a show look a little bit differently for both. But I also think in the animation space that might be changing in some of the conversations that I've heard at some of the studios. So that's what I was going to share.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I think that's a great way to think about it. There's really two big divisions of kids, and that's live action animation. And the kind of cool part about it is there's a lot of cross pollination between the two. I've brought in writers on my animated show that I've worked with on the live action side, and vice versa. That if you sort of prove that you can write for kids, there's a lot of translation between live action animation, maybe more so. I've nothing to go on for this, but maybe more so than the adult space, just because those feel maybe a little bit more delineated, or at least sectioned into, you're a comedy writer, you're writing Family Guy, and then you're maybe writing on a sitcom, but you're sort of bouncing between just those two worlds. And yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things that a lot of people don't necessarily understand about the kid space, certainly I didn't when I got into it, was, there's this stigma sort of against animation that, hey, it's the lesser, it's the ugly stepchild. Part of that is, because of the union differences. The live action is is under the WGA, the Writers Guild. Animation is under TAG, the Animation Guild, and there's just different sort of rules for both. And the Writers Guild is the 800-pound gorilla. It's a bigger union, it's stronger, it's better negotiating committees, and just more money, more capital, more people involved. So I think that's definitely a stigma that I've heard, that people, I don't want to do animation because, the pay is not as good, the benefits aren't as good, if you don't get free lunch, which as writers, that's always a very important part of the day. But I will say my experience has actually been that I think they're a lot closer than people think, and I sort of saw both worlds at the same time when my live action animated show were both going simultaneously, and the live action, just being totally transparent, the live action rate is definitely better than an animation rate. If you're a staff writer in animation, and if you're a staff writer in live action, you're getting a bigger weekly salary in live action, but the orders are usually a lot bigger in animation. And so your weekly rate might be lower in animation, but you're working on T.O.T.S. We are year round, 52 weeks a year. We're rolling out an 11-minute episode every week. And so, your career stability is a lot greater than if you're jumping from live action show to live action show. There's a few, you know, mainly in multicam sitcom space that are doing 24 episodes a year, and those will last a good portion of the year. But most of the series now are, you know, 13 episode, 10 episode, 8 episode orders. So you get staffed on a live action show, you're working 24 weeks, and then you're hunting for a job the next half of the year. Whereas if you're on an animated series, you can be on. A few of my writers on T.O.T.S have been working there for 3 years straight. And that's at the end of the day, you're equaling out that rate, or, you know, doing better just because there is that stability. So again, I think I think a lot of people judge it based on financial reasons, that, oh, I'm not interested in animation, there's no residuals. But I do think that they're a lot closer at the end of the day than people might expect.
I think that's a great perspective and a very good way to segue. And don't let me steer us away, Nora, if you've got input on that.
Well, just from the just working in live action perspective, I was just going to add that yeah, there can be shorter seasons, although when we're talking about kids TV, I think especially at like Nickelodeon, and I think maybe Disney, although I'm not sure, they do seem to still be doing like long seasons of multicam shows. When I was an assistant on the Thundermans, the way that I got to like be a writer's assistant and a script coordinator and get a freelance episode was that like that season lasted like over a year. And so like we celebrated some people's birthdays twice. And so, you know, there are still some shows that last longer. But, you know, yes, the best way to move up in live action, because there are sort of like levels, is to stay on a show for multiple seasons, because they'll definitely like bump you up and bump you up and bump you up. If you switch from show to show, which is becoming more common, then you might have to repeat a level. So that is something that sort of is an issue writers face. But the best way, I think, to work on career mobility in general is to build relationships. Because if you have to switch to a new show, the best way to hear about a new show and have people want you on that new show is to have them know they like working with you already. So the more people that you are getting to know and wanting to work with and want to work with you, I think like that's sort of the way to like chart a path of overall mobility. No matter, probably I would assume in live action and animation, you know, wanting to work with people you like and getting to know as many people as possible and finding your people.
I'm curious, Nora, how many episodes did you guys do on Julie and the Phantoms?
10. Well, season 1 is 10.
And how, because this is always an interesting part, right? Is like the nervousness when it's like, okay, we're writing episode 8 and we're wrapping in 4 weeks, and are we going to get a season 2? Like, how was that process all like in your guys' room?
I mean, I think in the streaming space, there is just sort of a general idea of like, we want to do more of this and we might not get to do more of this for a while. So we're all looking into development and other jobs and not sort of counting on picking up immediately. So that can be stressful, because it's very rare, I think, in that space that there's like an immediate knowledge, unless you're working on like a late season of Stranger Things, that like more is to come immediately. So speaking of which, watch Julie and the Phantoms.
Can I add to that? Because I think that's pointing to something I was going to bring up was, you know, we're moving into a time where there is a high metabolism for content. Mm-hmm. Depending on where you are, what studio you're at, being on a show can mean pretty good job security, and you know there's a certain length you're going to have, and other ones not so much. So also depending on what your responsibilities are, what your lifestyle is, to take that into consideration. because that is a reality of something that we're moving into. And I think that that might also become this space for, because we got D+, we have all these other, like, people are going to be pumping up a lot, pumping up their content, or ramping up their content. So that's something to keep an eye out for as well. And then to development, because that's another part of ascending the ladder is, while I staff, I also do a lot of development work, both in the network and outside of it. So that's another way to, jump steps or move up and connect and meet other people, like Nora said, in whatever space you're in, is being able to, pitch your ideas, or maybe even they have some IP that they want you to take a stab at. So that's also another thing. And there's some folks who their television career is just built on selling shows. Some people just freelance, some people love to be in a room, some people just sell shows, and some people do all of the above. So there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of options in what it means to be a television writer, I think.
Yeah, I've when I was sitting in through the Nick program, the very first time I was talking to writers in a room, they were always be working on a few things. No one's going to be mad at you. All of us are, you're behind if you're not. So, be writing something in your office when you have time, and be making more connections, and hopefully you get bosses who are like, oh yeah, you should take a meeting. You should do that pitch if that's what you need to do, while, maintaining your attention on your actual job that you're doing. But having an eye to what can I do next? What are other things that are opportunities coming up for me? And I sort of needed to hear from writers who were doing it. This is not a thing to feel guilty about. This is not a bad thing. It's not bad if you're working on something and sort of looking forward at the same time to other things you want to do.
Yeah, I think that's all fantastic advice. And it's not necessarily the sexy conversation about working in TV, but there are logistical factors at play in terms of building a career in TV. If you don't come from a super privileged financial background, if you're not if your last name isn't Spielberg, there are realities of trying to break into this industry, which is really changeable. It can
My last name is Lucas and I'm poor. I'm just
kidding. Well, so then you're a great example, and you can speak with authority on this subject, that this industry can be feast or famine. And I'd love to know how you guys have dealt with that, if you guys have dealt with that, how that plays into what jobs you decide to take. Yeah, that.
Yeah, I think Nora set it up great, and what she was saying of just, you really just have to stack projects, and everyone, everyone's doing it, and it's something that I think a lot of us learned when we were assistants, and as you all heard from our stories, you're working on 2 or 3, 4 different things. You're shooting a short, and you're writing a spec, and you're doing a commercial, and you're doing you're just, especially when you're trying to break in, you're just throwing all these darts at the board and trying to figure out what sticks, and you're making a lot of mistakes, and you're learning from that experience. And honestly, that doesn't change once you get in. You're doing those same skills that got you to that level. At least from my perspective, that's the thing that's going to carry you to, your mid-level job, to your EP job, to your, showrunner job, wherever you're at, using those same skill sets. That's what gets you that, that's what got you there. So keep doing that same thing. And I'm sure all of you guys are doing that, and you're writing constantly, and you're working on 2 or 3 different things. And that's really, from a career standpoint, that's the best way to keep you going, is, even like Halima said, once you're staffed on something, that's not the time to slow down and pump the brakes. That's the time to go, great, I have, a 24-week job. This is 24 weeks for me to get my next thing going after this, starting on that day one. So I think just having that mentality helps a lot. But I'll also say just one thing to that I've kind of learned and had to sort of relearn is is just on the emotional side. It's out of those projects, it's been so beneficial to me to carve out that one project that's just for you. You know, we work, especially once you're staffed on something, you work so much for a studio or this executive or this producer or this, you know, network. And even if it's your own thing, you're dealing with notes and other visions and this creative melting pot in this soup, which is fantastic. And that's how great stuff gets made. But there's that thing that we all started off doing, which was just like us and a blank page and just writing words and it just pouring from our soul onto the page. And that's something that I sort of realized I missed so much, you know, and kind of got away from. So I've forced myself to, you know, carve out an hour or 2 hours in the morning to just work on that one thing that's just you, that you love, and is just screams, you know, your flesh and bones, and having fun with it, and just being like, I don't give a shit who reads this or what, you know, what they think about it. It's just, this is my thing. And I think as writers, it's super helpful to have that, and reminds you why we're doing all this.
Yes to all of that. Just to say yes to all of that. And from, you know, I have the problem of like, I try not to overload my plate. I was that kid in college who was like, I'm going to take 18 units every semester because I love learning and pain. I do that with every aspect of my life. I load up my plate. So I try to not, you know, lean into it too much, because you can get taxed and you can forget to, like Travis said, to carve out stuff for yourself. I will say that even if it might be something you hear about something and it may not be off the very top something you might be interested in, it might be good to consider taking the meeting anyway, or meeting or connecting with that person, because one, people move around in this industry all the time and not in and out of the kid space to one network or studio to another. And so you never know when you make that connection with somebody, they may not have that thing that you want to do right then and there, but they could be doing something later in the future, you know. In my case, someone from Disney Junior had reached out to me, and I had never really thought about writing for Disney Junior, but I had a great meeting with this person, Kitty Walsh, who's awesome sauce. And she ended up connecting me to the Moo Girl team, which is, you know, a show that I love and I can't wait for the world to see. And then also from there, getting the opportunity to learn more about Disney Junior and develop with Disney Junior, which was great. So, you know, I would add into this conversation of, there's the opportunity to connect, like finding opportunities to connect with people as much as you can, because you never know when that it may not be a door you want to walk through necessarily, but there may be a window somewhere in that same vicinity that might be exactly what you want to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to build off of it, I'm sort of in the position where I'm like, I'm trying not to say no too early to things, where it's like eventually maybe there's like a literal time conflict, but usually you don't really know if that's going to happen yet. So it's sort of like, okay, let's have the meeting, see if we're a fit. And also, like, in your meetings, be genuine about who you are and what you care about and what you like. Because then, you know, sometimes maybe then the no is on their side, because they're like, oh, you're not right for this. We learned that, but now we have a better sense of the things that you are right for, and we'll think of you for that kind of stuff later. So, you know, I'm all about going and meeting with people, but presenting sort of like an honest version of myself to them. And then they can decide whether it seems like I can do what they want me to do, or whether I would be better at doing something else later. Yeah, I think if you're sort of open with people about the kinds of things you like, then you'll be the people who they think about for opportunities that are a good fit, and there won't be as many opportunities presented to you that you're like, I don't know, because they'll be like, we thought of you. Like, you know, I've had them be like, this character is just like you, which means like she's a big nerd. And I'm like, yes, I want to write for that big nerd girl. Thank you. You understand me. So yeah.
I was just going to chime in real quick. I love what you said, Nora, and I think that's such an important thing for everyone to hear, is just that honesty in meetings, especially when considering, you know, kids. Like, we can see through so quickly if someone comes in and is like, I love writing for 6 to 11 comedy. Like, I love SpongeBob. It's like, no, you don't. What do you actually love? And like, maybe it's Zombieland. And that's fine. Say Zombieland, because you have no idea. There might be, you know, Disney did a zombie versus cheerleaders movie, and maybe that's the thing that like you're perfect for. But if you're honest about like, these are the things that excite me, that passion goes so far, and everyone sees that. So I think some people, I got to get a job, so I'm just going to say what I can to get in the kid space. It's like, no, be honest about like what makes you you. And that's the thing that might fit great for the kid space, and it might not, but at least everyone's honest and everyone is clearly communicating like where you're a best fit, because it's never going to work out if you're sort of pretending to try to slip into this slot. You know, just be honest about what you do well and what you love to write, and you know, chances are there might be a spot for that in the kid space. Anyway, that's all I want to say.
I think it's cool that you talked about it sort of from like the hiring perspective, though, because I do think something that's important to remember is when you're starting out, it's like so scary to ask for help. And this is an industry of people, not everyone, but a lot of people who like want to help, who have been through it and want to help other people. And if they know what your deal is, it's easier for them to help you. Like, I've heard about like, oh, I know that this PA loved horror stuff, so I heard about a job opening on a horror show, and I'm gonna just direct it to her rather than like every nice PA I know. You know, and hopefully that continues as I can have more opportunities to help people. But I think that's important to remember, is that like people want to help you, so give them the chance to be helpful.
I think that's all phenomenal advice, not only for writers, but anyone trying to break into this industry anywhere. The best way to make a networking connection with somebody is to be real with them and to tell them what you're actually interested in, because even if it means you don't get the job you're going for today, they will think of you 6 months down the road for something that's a better fit, as long as you're not being fake and annoying with them, because everybody hates that and everybody can tell. Well, that's great. I want to get one last question in with you guys before we switch over to audience Q&A. I think this is an important one just in terms of keeping it real and spilling a little tea. There's kind of a stigma about working in kids TV and how it can make it harder to break into adult content. There are plenty of good examples. I listed a few at the top of the panel that kind of disprove that, but I'd love to hear if you guys have had experience with that, trying to break into a different genre. And if you have, what you've been up against, what that experience has been like.
I can speak to that. I mean, I think my situation was a little different because I kind of came from that filmmaking background. And then when I did get into series, I was doing more adult kind of content. So, you know, half of my world thinks that I'm like a drama filmmaker, and the other half of the world is like, no, she's a comedy kid writer. So I think that I come in kind of with that space, but I hold the belief that you can write or create yourself wherever you want to be. So if you want to be in the adult space or wherever it is, live action, it's just about having the proof to bring to someone that you can actually do this. It's tough when you don't have, like if you don't have that sample, if you don't have that a produced short or a web series or something that you've done that shows that, hey, I can do this. You know, it's kind of like any job. If someone was switching into a career and they don't have any experience at all in it, you would be hesitant to take them seriously in that role. So I think it's completely possible to pivot and go to a different space. I have had the experience of, I took a meeting for something that was for potentially develop a kids show. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I'm the right fit for this, but I also like to do this other stuff. There have been times where people are like, oh, okay, yeah, if we have something that fits, maybe, but they really only see me as in the kid space. But I've also had meetings on the other side where I've gotten to authentically share, some of the other kinds of stories that I like to tell, and they've been open to it. They'll ask for a sample of said thing to make sure that, to see if you really know how to do that. But that's been my experience, that I think that you can pivot, but you just have to have the samples for it. On the other side, if you are in the kids space, at least in my experience, you will get flooded with kids opportunities. That doesn't mean you can't pivot and do something else, but at least for me, it's been, people will come to you with that stuff too. So I don't know. I kind of see it as a win-win, and you're kind of in control of what direction you want to steer yourself. That's my belief.
Yeah, I same. I think you hit it on the head. I've set up a couple features outside of the kid space, and it's just really comes down to the material. It's like, if you have a great idea for a trapped thriller, then great. That no one's gonna say like, oh, you wrote on Rugrats, like you can't write this feature, because you've written it, it's there. Like, it's really about the work. Like, if you want to write, if you want to write the next Game of Thrones, write that pilot, make it amazing, and send it out there. And people aren't going to care what your credits are. And I think actually, my experience has been, people kind of think it's cool because they're meeting with a lot of the adult TV and film executives. They're not meeting with a lot of kids TV people. So, you're Nora, and you mentioned, hey, I'm working on Julie and the Phantoms. They're like, oh my God, my niece, love that show. That's so cool. And then you've got an icebreaker, and you're talking about, sort of this common ground. So I don't know. My experience has been, it's never been a hindrance to have credits. It's not going to put you behind or stigmatize you if the work is there.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of philosophy towards it, that shows that it's sort of fair, of like, if you prove that you can do the work, then people will accept that you can do the work. I think one of the sort of like transitional spaces that's very popular right now is this sort of like co-viewing goal of like shows that families can watch together, that kids can watch with their parents. And some of that is just like kids TV, kids and family TV. Some of that gears itself a little older, and I've had both experiences where they brought me in and were like, we think you would be great for something like this because you understand both. And then there have been people who are like, we're really going with like stand-up comedians, like traditional like adult sitcom writers. So I don't want to say like there will never be anyone you meet with who won't have like some internal bias about it. But I think you also have the ability to prove them wrong, I guess, is sort of the overall idea.
Can I add one other thing? There's an animation boom happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whether I feel like whether you're in the kid space or not, if you're interested in animation, even if you're in the kid space, people are interested, because there are people who are leaning into animation who've never done it before. So they're like, if you have experience in that period, you might, they may lean in a little bit more to your experience, whether or not you currently write for the audience they're looking to write for. So that's something too.
Yes, it's so hard to find talent. And that's, again, why it's so great we're talking to everyone here, because especially in animation, just we're in the throes of, starting to staff up another series. It's like, it's hard. It's super hard because there's so much animated content, and everyone is, is off on and doing their own thing and working. So we need new voices. We need new writers to come in and fill those spots.
All right, this is a two-parter. Should the spec and original pilot you plan to submit to the program be family oriented? I'll take that part because I oversee the program. They don't need to be family oriented. The spec that you write needs to be based on a show on the accepted shows list. And if you write something that is for an adult audience, it should sound that way. We'd rather see that you can achieve the tone and mimic the characters and get the sense of humor of a show accurately, rather than have you try and age down an adult show for kids, because that wouldn't make sense. And then in terms of the pilot, it does not need to be family oriented. It can be. It needs to be a half-hour comedy. That's it. You might be one step ahead of other folks if you submit a family oriented comedy, because you can workshop it and start using it as a sample to get staffed at Nick right away. That would help you. It does not need to be, though. We're first and foremost looking for good comedy writers. And then the second part of that, what is a vital skill every aspiring TV writer should work to master? Right off the bat, I say outlining. Work on your outlining. It's very important, but you guys are the writers. I'll have you chime in.
What we were talking about in terms of multitasking, you know, being it's part multitasking, but the other part is just not being precious about that thing you're working on. And I think that's a hard skill to master, which is like being so committed in the moment when you're working on it, and then being able to go, okay, that thing is what it is, and I'm now on to the next thing. And I think that's something that, you know, I still struggle with today, which is like being able to move forward and not sit and tinker and spend, you know, 3 months on a few pages that ultimately aren't going to have any impact on whether it's read, whether it's produced, whether it makes that next move for your career. So, you know, do a great job, be thorough, read it, you know, proof it, all that stuff, but be able to be nimble and move on. You know, as we've said, there's just making so much stuff these days, and that's more important, I think, than ever, is to just be nimble and from a career standpoint, be able to make those moves quickly.
I think being a team player, because I think making TV is such a team sport in the writer's room, and then with like every single other person who's working on the show. And so, you know, when you are writing your samples, it's like, this is my voice and this is my story and I'm the one who did this. And then as soon as you're working, it's like, oh, we're all sort of working on this together and figuring out the best version of this together. And coming into TV, I was like, I didn't like group projects as a kid. Is this going to be like a problem for me? Should I work on this? And like, yes, everyone should work on this. But I think the difference between this and maybe some of the projects you did as a kid is like, everyone who's working on the show ideally like cares about it and wants it to go well. And so, you know, there's less of the like, who's doing work, who's not doing work. And it's like, we're all doing work. We're all here with good intentions. We all want to tell a great story. So let's listen to each other and let's not worry about like who gets credit and who's doing whatever, and just make the best version of this possible, while also supporting what the showrunners want, because that does matter.
Yeah. To what Nora said, because I was going to say something similar to that, is, you know, being the team player. For one, having the vibe of the room, you want the vibe of the room to be good. You're going to be in the room and with these folks for a long period of time. So you want to contribute to a healthy and empowering environment. But also, these are folks, and again, being a TV writer means many things. So that could be being staff, pitching, freelancing. You're interacting with people who are ahead of you and alongside you that can hire you. So you definitely want to have the skill of being able to listen, being able to yes and someone, you know, not shoot down ideas. There's a saying, pardon my French, but you know, pitch don't bitch is a a phrase that I've heard. And so if you're gonna, you know, critique something or you know, point something out, to offer a fix to it, you know, to be solution oriented, I think. And to what Travis said, as far as being able to, push something across the finish line, I would say understanding structure. If you can understand and master the way structure works, then you can crank out work faster. You can break a story faster. And my brain looks at story like an equation, like you need this and you need that. And every single one I tell is different, has a different skin. But if you understand the structure, when you get the premise of a story, you can start to really see that story a lot faster than other people. And that helps you hit deadlines, because TV deadlines are deadlines that have to be hit. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Another one, when writing kids TV, are you writing one 15-minute episode or putting two of them together for a 30-minute block?
One, it depends on if you're, in terms of, so I'll just speak for T.O.T.S. We write 11-minute, they're technically 11 minutes because they become a 22, which is the standard sort of half hour. And we write them separately. So it's each one is its own standalone episode, and then we combine them. So I think most of the time, and Kate, you'll be able to speak to this, but when you're talking about a spec of a SpongeBob, you're not writing both carts, you're writing one of the carts, one of the 11 minutes.
I'm now a high school teacher, but have long aspired to work on the kinds of shows that influenced me as a child. Do you work with any educational professionals when writing and developing shows for kids? We touched on this a little bit, but you guys want to go into it a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just because I'm working on a preschool show, there is a curriculum department, I shouldn't say curriculum, educational department of Disney Junior that weighs in and out of your draft, but it's very much, again, socio-emotional, which was a new term for me getting into this business, but it's basically, friendship, teamwork, being there for each other, the sort of aspects of every story, family, community, things that are tied to just storytelling in general. And it's about, making sure that the notes we get are basically making sure that those kinds of things connect to our audience, which, can be 3 to 8. And if you don't have a, 3 to 8-year-old in your life, you might not necessarily know that they don't know the term scientist. And so you might need to explain what a scientist is and what that does, what that person does. So yeah, there's no curriculum aspect. There's no numbers and letters, but there is an aspect of, in terms on those shows of education weighing on in, and then on the 6 to 11 side, I'm sure you guys can speak more to that, but at least on there's typically no educational department weighing in on those side of things. It's creative notes, and the creative executives obviously have in mind what a 6 to 11-year-old kid is experiencing and can experience, but Nora might have a different especially on a Netflix show, how.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, sort of the creative executives weigh in and do sort of let us know our parameters if we run up against them. Also, if you're working with people who have been doing it for a long time, they'll sort of remember things that you need to do. And a lot of it is, less like a limitation on storytelling and just, reminders of what the audience can do. So I think on Nickelodeon, we would sometimes be like, oh, if there's a banner that says something, not everyone who's watching this can read. So we have to have the characters say it out loud in dialogue. So those kind of things. It also helps to work with a lot of people who are parents. I'm not a parent. I have nephews, but I'm not a parent. But, if we have writers who have a different age range of kids, they can sort of loop us into okay, this is what my 3-year-old can do. And my 3-year-old doesn't represent all 3-year-olds in the world, but at least that's some insight. This is what my 12-year-old cares about. This is what my 8-year-old cares about. And I feel like that is sort of the level of checking ourselves that we do in the room, and then the network steps in if they need to.
Yeah, and I'll just touch for the show that I'm on, 6 to 11 show. not necessarily teachers per se, educators per se, but we have worked with consultants on maybe cultural specific stuff. And some of these people might come from an education background as well. But at least on the show that I have, that's mostly who we work with. Yeah.
That's great. Just speaking on behalf of Nickelodeon, not all shows require it, but the ones that do, they provide the resources. There are educational professionals, there are cultural consultants, there are focus groups of kids. Somebody was just telling me the other day, you have not been heckled until you've been heckled by a 6-year-old who doesn't like your show. So there are all kinds of resources available to people who do develop in the kid space. Next one, what makes the answers to the essay questions on the application stand out? So another writing program one. First and foremost, remember that it's a writing sample. It's not just you blurting answers at us or giving us the most efficient answer possible. We want to see out of this that you can tell us a story. Does it have narrative to it? And I don't mean the one that's like, what's your social media handle? I mean the ones that are like, tell us about you. And if you say, oh, I was born here and I went to school here and then I did this and now I do that, it's not a story and we don't care and we're not hooked. And there's no reason for us to think that your scripts are any more interesting than that.
When I was applying, I looked at the website and read everyone's all the like previous writers' bios and was like, oh, that's interesting. And I made it in my own voice, but I was like, this is a good way to tell like how people who know how to tell a story about themselves present that story. So that's my hot tip for some examples of people telling stories about themselves that like the program approves of.
Yeah, for my approach to the Nick program essay was to just write in the voice that I speak in. Like, okay, well, this is kind of how I think, and this is where I'm from, and like I just leaned into that comedy voice, and it was the first time I had written an essay that way, and the first program that I got into. So I would definitely lean into that, and the essays, the bios on the website, I think are a good reference for that too.
I totally forgot you even had to write an essay, so I'm not the one to answer that question.
All right, well, last one. We are right up on time. So in 30 seconds or less, how do you do well in a writing interview?
I sort of said this already, but be honest about who you are and be honest about what you like about whatever you're interviewing for. And figure out if there's, you know, a vibe between you and the person that you're talking to, because sometimes it's just like, oh, this one's not going to work out, or this one is. So just, that won't be fun if you lie and that's how you get it, because then you'll have to be that person for the whole job. So be yourself.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that for sure. I think, you know, the successful interviews, look, you're only going to get an interview if the showrunner or the executive or whoever you're meeting with liked your script. So the pressure's off. Like, you're there, you got into the room. So relax and show who you are. There's nothing more uncomfortable when you're sitting in a day full of writers meetings when you're just stuck for half an hour with a really uncomfortable, nervous energy. And it's just for both parties. It's not helpful because, you know, as someone hiring writers, we're not seeing who you are. And as a writer, you're not processing sort of what the show is and what we're asking. And there's just this barrier up. So I think just being relaxed, comfortable. I remember sharing an embarrassing story, but the first job interview I ever had in LA, I was coming from New York, from the ABC News, you know, area. And I showed up in a full suit with a tie and walked in and thought, like, this is what, you know, it's a job interview. Like, you wear a suit and you go in and, you know, try to look your best and impress them and say the right things. And the person interviewing me was like, we're going to stop for a second. Take your tie off. You look like an accountant. And I remember that lesson, you know, to this day. It's just like, it's it's just about being yourself, like being comfortable in who you are and showcasing that. You know, we're creative people, and you want to see who that person is that you're going to be spending, you know, 10 hours a day every day for, you know, possibly 3 or 4 years with. Like, you want to form a great relationship and know that you know, that works.
And just to piggyback off of especially the suit, the suit bit, echoing what was everything that was said, also research where you are interviewing, research the person you're going to be speaking to, try to get information about the folks who are in that room, because you don't want to go into an interview and be like, oh yeah, Travis, I love that show you made, Doc McStuffins. Like, that's you know what I mean? So you want to be prepared, because then you can have an honest, authentic conversation with this person, because you know a little bit about them, about the work that they do and the work that they're trying to do. I think that will help put you a bit more at ease, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would 100% do yourself a favor and get to know the studio, get to know the place, the network, and the person, so that you know how to show up. You can catch the vibe of, is this a place where where they wear suits and stuff, or dress up nice, or are people walking around in flip-flops, you know? So that's one big thing you can do to help yourself out.
That's great. I too was comically overdressed for my interview at Nickelodeon, where I would describe the dress code as, don't wear your pajamas unless it's Friday.
We've all done.
Yeah, and you can kind of like make your style the version of whoever you're going to see. So you'll be like, oh, I'm interviewing for this, and this might be a little more formal, so I'll sort of like show myself in my formal version, or like I'll show myself in my casual version. Like,
everyone's going to be in their hoodies by 3 weeks into the show.
Yeah,
so
that's all.
Right, exactly. And then if you're on Zoom, everyone's in hoodies day one. So just it's yeah. But I also will add that if it also gives you an opportunity, like showing up to the space, paying attention to what's in the room and around that person, because then you can actually start a conversation about, like, if you see a photo and there says my favorite place is Disneyland or wherever, and you love Disneyland, that's something you could casually like bring up and talk about, you know, be a person in the room too. So yeah, don't be afraid to be a human being when you meet with people.
Well, that is such a great place to end. Thank you so much, you guys, for joining me on this panel. I appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom with everyone from the ISA crew. Thank you to the ISA crew for joining us. There were tons of you out there, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. One last pitch for the Nick writing program. We open for submissions July 1st. We'll be open until August 1st. You can apply online with a spec from our accepted shows list and an original comedy pilot. So get to writing. It's already almost May, for God's sake. You can read more about the program and get the rest of your FAQs answered at www.nickwriting.com. We would love to be part of your writing journey the way we have been for these amazing folks. And that's all I got.